We're talking today with Pete Van Til of Hudsonville, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, so Pete, let's begin at the beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
What year?
In 1946.
Okay, and then did you grow up in the Grand Rapids area?
Yes, I grew up in Granville.
Okay, and what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My dad was a supervisor in a furniture factory, and my mother worked for Winters and Crampton, which is no longer around.
Okay,
And,
all right. Now, when did you finish high school?
in 1964.
And what did you do after high school?
The first year I just worked and kind of goofed off and so forth, and then after I was out for a year and a half, I decided to join the Army.
Okay, and why did you decide to join the Army?
Always wanted to be in the military ever since I was a little kid. I thought it'd be a great thing to do, and so the Vietnam thing going on. Then one of my best friends, he enlisted, and so about 4 months after he did, I decided I would do.
Okay, and why did you pick the Army?
First, I was going to do Navy, but they, at the time, for some odd reason, I went to recruiter and they weren't taking any recruits then, because I think because of the Vietnam thing, they had a lot of high enlistment.
Yeah, everyone wanted to be in the Navy rather than the Army or the Marine Corps.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then I went to the Coast Guard. I thought, well, what about the Coast Guard? And they just kind of snickered at me.
Mm-hmm.
He says, we come back in about 5 years, you know. So I just said, well, I'll go in the Army.
Okay, all right. So when do you, now when you enlisted, were you allowed to pick what kind of training you got or anything like that, or were you just going to go where they sent you?
No, I was allowed to choose
Okay.
through basic.
And what did you ask for?
First they asked me, because I scored quite high on my aptitude test,
Right.
those type of things. And they asked me if I wanted to be a pilot. I said, yeah, I could do that. Well, I got partway through the physical for it, and the eye doctor says, what in the world are you doing here? Because I didn't have 20/20 vision that you needed at the time for uncorrected, so I couldn't do it. So then I went back to my company commander in the basics, and a couple of days later he called me in and he says, how about officer training school? I said, yes. And I said, what are they offering? And they told me infantry, artillery, and maybe armor.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, none of them sounded too good to me, so I said, I don't think so. I'll just pass on that. And he kind of looked around like this, and he says, I don't blame you. Because the war was going on, being
Right.
an infantry officer, you know. But, and so I decided to take medic, be a corpsman.
Okay, now we're going to back up a little bit. Once you enlist, where do you go first? Do you get processed somewhere?
Yeah, through Detroit.
Okay.
I forgot what they called it, but through my physicals and
Right.
all
Okay.
that.
All right. And then when did you report? When did you report for duty?
4th of January, I enlisted, and
That's 1966?
1966.
Okay.
I see. And I was sworn in. Boy, it's kind of hazy, you know. It's a long time ago.
Right.
And then, right after the physical, after they sent me for my physical, then I went from there down to Kentucky for basic training.
All right. And where in Kentucky were you going? Is it Fort Knox?
Yeah, Fort Knox.
Okay, yeah, that was the standard place for Michigan guys to go at that
Right.
time. All right. Now, describe what basic training was like.
I didn't have too bad of a time of it. I was really good shape at the time. I was very athletic. I played sports and things like that. And then my buddy that went in before I did, he said, just keep your mouth shut and do what you're told, and you'll be fine. And that's what I did. I did real well. In fact, there's parts I didn't like about it, of course, but In the long run, I kind of enjoyed it. Because
Okay. Now, did you understand what they were trying to do with you?
oh yeah,
Okay. So that break you down, build you up thing?
yeah, they
Yeah.
wanted to just teach you discipline and so forth. And
Okay. Now, what did they do when people messed up?
anywhere from KP they found other things for them to do, but KP type stuff was quite often.
All right. I mean, sometimes they talk about some of the sergeants, you know, whether it was hitting people or having other ways of disciplining them or punishing an entire platoon for what one guy did.
Yeah, I saw that a couple of times where they, so that the rest of the guys would get after them, you know, about straighten up. But I never saw any physical thing, you know.
Okay. Yeah. I always ask because you never know what you'll
Yeah,
find out.
yeah.
Okay.
No, there were probably times when maybe they kind of wanted to, but the drill instructors were pretty disciplined guys themselves, you know, and so.
Okay. All right. And then how long was the basic training?
Let's see, what was that? 8 weeks, I think it was at the time.
Yeah. 8 weeks was standard.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was, and was during that time while you were in basic, you were figuring out what you wanted your specialization to be.
Right.
Okay. And so you chose to be a medic.
Right.
All right. And so where do they send you for advanced training?
Normally they send you to Texas to do it, but I had worked as, they called them orderlies back in those days. When I got out of high school, I worked as an orderly at St. Mary's Hospital for a while.
Okay.
And so they decided to send me just on-the-job training, OJT. I went to Alabama, Redstone Arsenal, Alabama.
What was that? What place now?
Excuse me. Redstone Arsenal.
Redstone Arsenal. Okay.
Huntsville, Alabama. That's where they test all the rocket engines and those type of things. And they sent me there, and I was there. Went from there to Vietnam. But
Okay. So how long were you in Alabama?
I see, I went April, May, June, July, August. I was there about 6 months.
Okay. Now, in terms of, say, you're getting on-the-job training, were you getting any training to be a combat medic or just sort of a hospital corpsman?
More at hospital.
Yeah.
And the rest of it I kind of learned on my own because I had a guy in my unit there that was a career soldier, and he had been in the Korean War. He was getting ready to retire, and he was a combat medic then. So he kind of taught me a lot of that stuff, you know.
Okay.
How to do stitches, how to do this, how to do that, how to that
All
type
right.
of thing.
And what was life like for you in Alabama when you're on that base? What was the day-to-day routine like?
It was a gravy train. It was a just wonderful dude. I loved it there. I would sometimes they'd change my shifts, but I'd go to work. I'd have an 8-hour shift. Once in a while, they want me to stay over, that type of thing. And it was a very small hospital. And the joke was around there that there's more generals than there are privates on this base because a lot of rank was going on. That's what Werner von Braun, all these guys were over there with the missile program,
Right.
that type of thing. So it was good duty. They had a civilian mess hall and just great food. And I had really good duty there.
All right. And did you go off the base much?
Yeah, quite a bit, quite a bit.
Okay. And what was the nearest town that you'd go to?
Huntsville,
Okay.
which is a nice town. I haven't been there in years, but it's probably much larger. But it was I'd say maybe size of Grand Rapids at that time, you know, and a lot of military people living there and so forth. It was a nice place.
Okay. And how did the civilians treat the military people?
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now while you're there, were you following the news about Vietnam and that kind of thing?
Yeah, a little bit. We start watching it.
And did you expect that sooner or later you were going to go there?
I thought there was a good chance I would.
Okay.
Excuse me.
All right.
Yeah, and so I In fact, when I was there, I put in a 1049 to go to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And I was dating my wife. We were serious about getting married. We were planning on getting married. And so I put a 1049 for Germany. I got my orders to go to Germany. So I called my wife and said, guess what? We can get married. I want to get married in September. And she was starting to plan the wedding already. We're going to have a double wedding with her younger sister. And then we're going to go to Germany for a year and a half or so. Oh, thank you.
All right. So you think you're going to Germany, and then what happens?
A week later, less than a week later, I get orders changed to go to Vietnam.
Oh.
And so the odd part of it is that there was another medic that bumped across me because I was living on base.
Mm.
He had orders to go to Vietnam, and they changed his to go to Germany. I thought, what's up with this, you know? So I went to see my first sergeant there, and he was just a great guy. So I told him what was going on. I was going to get married and plan on going to Germany. He says, I can get your orders changed back to Germany. He says, the problem is you won't be there for 2 months, and they'll be sending you to Vietnam because they're hurting for medics over there big time, you know. So, so I told my wife that, and I said, maybe we should cancel the wedding. She said, no way, we got everything planned, going to do it. So, well, in September, got married on September 16, and October 14, I was sitting in Vietnam.
All right. Now, what's the process for getting you to Vietnam?
I had a leave of absence, you know, and so then they sent me to Oakland, California, processed out of there, and then flew from there to Vietnam.
All right. And were you flying on a chartered commercial jet or a military aircraft?
C-141, I think it was. The seats were backwards, and they had all of our duffel bags up in the rear there, and so we got weighted down by Air Force personnel, and it was quite a flight. We just had a ball on that flight because guys were all young guys, you know, we kidding around with the Air Force guys that had a service food and all that kind of stuff. You know, it was a good flight.
Okay. And do you remember where you stopped on the way over?
I think Guam or somewhere.
Okay.
Refueled and.
And then where did you land in Vietnam?
We landed in what's the name of that town?
Were you near Saigon or were you somewhere else?
No, it wasn't Saigon. It was Pleiku.
Pleiku. You flew straight into Pleiku?
Yeah, we went into Pleiku.
Okay.
And then.
And when you get off the plane, what happens?
Well, they picked us up in buses and so forth, and then they processed it in first where we were going. And so my orders called for headquarters company, 1st Cavalry Division, 1st to 5th. And I'm like on the bus, and they loaded up the buses, and they started dropping us off in An Khe, which is a huge base, you know, the base there was huge. And so a guy that was my age was sitting on the bus with me. We were the only two left, and we both had orders for headquarters, 1st to 5th. So I said to him, I said, he was from North Dakota, and I said, boy, maybe we'll have work in a field hospital or something like that. So we drove up, and they let us off, and it says, first, you know, we knew it was an infantry company, and we looked at each other. We said, I don't think we're going to be working in an aid station, you know. So, and that guy that was on the bus of mine is my best friend now. He still lives in North Dakota. We communicate quite a bit.
Okay. So
he ended up becoming the 1st platoon medic in Charlie Company, and I was 2nd platoon medic.
All right. Now, was your company in the field when you got there?
Yeah.
Okay. And did you fly out to join them, or did they come to you?
Well, they kept us in An Khe for a couple of weeks. And there was an aid station there that we were working at. They had us working at the aid station. And then finally, they sent us forward LZ Uplift,
Okay.
which is a pretty good sized artillery base.
All right. Now, while you were still at An Khe, did they give you any kind of orientation training, or did they just?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So what kind of stuff were they teaching you?
Went to like jungle training, how to survive, you know, that type of thing, repelling from
Okay.
things like
So
that.
you did get some familiarity with all of that.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So you go to the aid station, and then they send you out to join the company.
They sent me first. They sent us to LZ Uplift,
Yes, Uplift. That's what we got. Yeah.
and we were there. It was about it was about a month before I went actually joined Charlie Company,
Okay.
because we were both working at aid station. Well, then one day there was a lot of activity going on at Uplift, and so they had the colonels and all that, and they were on the radio. So Bob and I could listen in. They let us stand there and listen in. And Charlie Company was a terrible firefight.
Mm-hmm.
They had 38 killed, and that within a couple hours' time, they were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that saved them was the jets came in, and otherwise, you know, the whole third platoon was almost wiped out completely. And so then Bob looked at me. He said, "Guess where we're going tomorrow?"
Mm-hmm.
So, and the very next day, we joined Charlie Company out in the field,
Okay.
because they had lost 2 medics. One was wounded real seriously, and one was killed.
All right. And what kind of reception do you get? What happens to you once you go out and join the company?
A good reception. After I walked out there, then there was a Staff Sergeant Henry Lee, who later lost his life. And he was the first one to greet me. He was I went to 2nd Platoon. He was one of the squad leaders.
Mm-hmm.
He came up and he shook my hand and welcomed me to Charlie Company, and started talking. He said, and he was a Southern boy, and he had a real Southern accent. And he said, "Oh, you're one of those northern boys, you know, and that we can't understand." He said something like that, and something like that. We kidded back and forth. Became close friends then, you know. And then I was E3, and as soon as I went out there, they made me an E4
Right.
right away. And so I had a good reception. They took good care of the medics in the Charlie Company. The 11 Bravos, they took care of Doc, you know.
Yeah.
They always had me on the helicopter. I always sat in the middle. That seat's reserved for Doc, you know, because of course they were on, sitting on by the skid, you know, ready for
Okay.
action.
Now, did you carry a weapon yourself?
Yeah, I started out with, when they asked me if I wanted an M16 or a 45, I said, "Can I get both?" He said, "Yeah, you got both." So I had a 45 and an M16. Well, after the first skirmishes out in the boondocks, I never used the M16. I was too busy. Guys were hit. You couldn't, you know. So I just kept the 45 and turned the M16 on.
All right. Okay. So how quickly after you join that company do they see any action?
Let's see, it was on the 21st of November when I joined them. I would say within a couple of weeks, a week or two.
Okay.
We'd get sniper fire on patrol almost every day. We'd get some kind of sniper fire at least, but first firefight was probably in late November, I'd say.
And what was the terrain like? What was the land like that you were operating in?
We were in the Central Highlands, so we had mountains, we had huge rice paddies, jungles, beautiful place.
It's just too bad they had a war on.
Too bad they had a war on it. It's just absolutely a beautiful place. And so they'd drop us off, and we'd hump all day, and sometimes we'd make 3, 4, 5 air assaults a day. You know, they'd pick us up and take us somewhere else. But
All right. What do you remember about that first firefight?
I think there was 3 killed that day, if I remember, and they weren't in my platoon, from my platoon. So
Mhm.
you were there, but they'd spread our platoons out quite a bit, you know, we
Mhm.
were on patrol, but so I don't remember a whole lot about that.
Okay.
In fact, I probably have put it out of my mind. A lot of these I tried to put them out of my mind, you know, especially the ones where I lost them real close,
Mhm.
buddies of mine.
All right. So the first time the company gets in trouble, it's not your platoon that gets involved. All right. Now, in the area that you were operating, were there civilians around, or was it all?
Yeah, mostly villages, small villages,
Mhm.
thatch roof houses and peasants type of thing, people,
Okay.
and not any real towns,
Mhm.
except for Bound Sound. That was a so-so little city, you know, little town. So we were mostly out in the boondocks where we'd be.
Okay.
We'd camp out. We'd never go to hardly ever go to a base camp or anything like that.
All right. And what was your unit trying to do at that point? What was your mission?
Um, at that point, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was just getting started down. The NVA were coming down from North Vietnam through Laos and Cambodia, and they were coming in through Cambodia, and that was our job, was to, from the South China Sea over Cambodia, we just keep moving.
Mhm.
Um,
Sort of try to keep them out or find them
right,
if they come in.
right, and we'd have the spotter planes. They'd find out where they were, and they had intelligence. So if they heard about a group of NBA coming in, then they'd fly us into that, see what we could round up, you know, see what happened. But
All right. And then how quickly did you start actually treating casualties? I mean, were some of the men hit by the sniper fire or?
yeah, I'd say in December we had
Okay.
quite a few of that. Quite a few wounded. Not too many deaths, then, thankfully. And but for a while it was almost daily we'd be getting some kind of sniper fire. But
All right.
and
And
then
then,
bigger fights would come periodically. In January we had quite a big one. We lost some guys.
okay. And can you describe that a little bit, or what you saw of it, or what you did at that time?
I think it was around mid-January somewhere. I think we lost 8 or 9 KIAs and several wounded. And some in my platoon, but I don't think I had any KIAs, but I had several wounded at that one.
Okay. When a firefight starts, then what do you do?
I would see right from the beginning. They said they wanted me to travel close to the machine gunner.
Okay.
So if I needed cover fire, I was right by him. So I ended up carrying belts for him, you know, and so forth. And we got real close, all of us guys, and they would kind of keep me kind of in the middle of the platoon. And then when everything hit the fan, they'd want me to get down. So they'd just stay down, you know. And so I'd fire. That's back on my rifle yet. You know, I still had my rifle
Mhm.
at times, and I fire some rounds off, and they just said, "You just stay down, you know, let us do the shooting."
Yeah.
So then when I got guys hit, and they of course call for the medic, and I found out real quick that they ended up calling me. I wanted them to call me by my name because the enemy knew what medic was, and they looked for medics. You know, if they saw the medic coming up, you're a target. You know. And then they would just tell me, the machine gunner would give me some firepower, and the other guys would open up and say, "Okay, go out." And I'd go to whoever the guy that was wounded was, and
Mm-hmm.
patch him up, and try to keep him alive, you know.
Right.
Another rifleman, usually a couple of them would come out and give fire going back, and then they'd help carry him, get him back to the rear. We could evac him out eventually, but.
Now, how useful was that training you'd gotten back in Alabama from that senior medic? Did he teach you things there that you wound up using in the field?
Yeah, I think they did. Like how to give shot morphine and things like that. I learned all that. And, as I was telling you, the guy that was a Korean War
Right.
vet, and he showed me how to get the IVs properly and how to put the Band-Aid on and get the pressure on it, try to get the bleeding stopped and things like that. But, so it was useful.
Okay.
And you just start picking it up. And sometimes you would have multiple casualties. There'd be two medics working together. We'd be working together trying to keep these guys going. You know, another platoon that wasn't hit so bad would come over and would help. And
Okay. And did they have rules for triage or who you treat first?
yeah, we usually tried to take the ones that were hit the worst.
Okay.
You know, because some of them were wounded, but they were not in danger of passing away
Right.
right then. So we go after the guys that were unconscious or maybe a chest type wound or a serious wound. Try to get them first. And
Okay. All right. So did you spend, you're in Vietnam for a year. Did you spend your whole year basically as a medic with a platoon, or did you have different assignments later?
we stayed out. I was out. The rule was back then that the medics would go 6 months out in the field,
Right.
and 6 months in the rear. And I was out there longer than that because there was so much more shortage of medics. We were always short of medics. We were supposed to have 4 platoon medics and a senior aide man.
Right.
But we were always working with 4, and sometimes we'd have 5. And then in June, the senior medic of our company, he rotated back to the States. And so I was an E5 then, so they made me the senior aide medic. But I was with senior aide man with a company medic, they call them, and I was with them. I was always to stay with the 2nd platoon because we were short. And I stayed out there until late August, early September.
Okay. Now, over the course of that time when you're in the field, did the nature of the fighting or your activities, did that change, or was it pretty much always the same?
It was all pretty much the same. Because the entire time I was there, 1st Cav was in the Central Highlands. So I got real familiar with that terrain, and it was pretty much the same type of things we were doing, going into the villages, trying to find out if there were enemy villages, or real easy to tell the difference.
Well, how would you tell the difference?
If you went in and they didn't come out and greet you in the villages, the kids didn't and all that stuff, you had a pretty good idea that it was probably an enemy village. And either Viet Cong or maybe even the NVA had taken the village over because they were real nasty to the civilian population. But the kids would come out and so forth, and the women, then you're probably pretty secure that they were more on the American side.
Okay. Now, do you know if these were all ethnic Vietnamese villagers, or did you ever see Montagnards or tribal peoples?
Oh, lots of Montagnards, yes. It's through there, and they were pretty much just, they really wanted to just be left alone and carry on their life, and they were good people, they were.
All right.
And we had a couple of interpreters, guys that knew how to speak the language, the different languages and so forth, so we could communicate with them.
All right. Did you have any sense of whether or not your efforts were successful? Were you winning the war, or were you spinning your wheels?
After I was there about 6 months, I started questioning something's wrong, something's just not right here,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And when in late '66 already, it was in December, we had a stand down. We just stay in place, and the rumor was that the first Cav was going to go into North Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and they were going to hit North Vietnam on the ground. We thought, oh great, you know. And we're going to stand out for 3 days, and just like that, it ended.
Mm-hmm.
Forget it, you know, we're not going to do it. And you know, even at '66, late '66, we had heard that there was problems in the United States with the war, that
Right.
the protesting was starting.
Yeah, because the draft had really ramped up in '66, and so I think that got driven home to a lot more people, and the anti-war movement got going.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're getting, and of course, you're getting new guys coming in as replacements during this time.
All the time,
Who
yeah.
were exposed to more of that too. All right. Now, you mentioned when we were doing the paperwork ahead of time that you've got a Purple Heart. So you were wounded at some point.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
That was on March 21st of '67, and the day before that, Alpha Company had got hit real hard in this outside this village, and so then they took us in that night. They made a nighttime air assault into those guys to help them out, and so then they pretty well cleared them out, got the enemy, took off, and then we were kind of just waiting around, kind of guarding this perimeter around it by this village. And then they said, everybody saddle up, you know, just take your weapons and your ammo, and we're taking off into this village. They had a company-sized NVA in this village. So they lifted us in there, and they had to drop us off about a half a mile from this village because we were getting so much ground fire. So we humped in there, and boy, all heck broke loose. You know, it was bad. They were behind us, in front of us. They had us in a triangle type ambush, and so everybody stayed down. I stayed down, got behind my rucksack, you know, my stuff, you know, and bullets were just a-flying. And finally, one of the guys came running up to me. He said, "Doc, we got some guys hit down here in this clearing." I said, "Okay, let's go." And he got me down there, and there ended up there was 10 of us down there. And we ended up getting cut off from the rest of the company. They had snipers in the trees, and they had this elephant grass in front of us, real thick. So they started throwing grenades in on us, and we started throwing grenades back at them. And then they had the snipers. When I came down there was a couple guys hit real bad, and one was a sergeant that I told you about that first to greet me. He was wounded real bad, and he was going into shock. So I went to him first. And first I checked, there was 3 guys that were moving at all, and I checked them, and they were all killed, instantly killed. And then, so I went to see Sergeant Lee, and then he was kind of like babbling because he was going into shock, and I put him in my arms like this, and tried to talk to him. I said, "What's your wife's name? What's your wife's name?" Do anything to talk. And he's babbling a little bit, and I usually don't talk about this, but I'm holding my arms, and he had a round from a sniper in a tree came right through his head.
Wow.
Came out his cheek.
Wow.
Gone just like that.
All right.
And about the same time, I thought, well, I got to help these other guys, you know. So I left him. Well, there was nothing I could do for him.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple other guys who were hit pretty bad. And so when I was heading toward them, they threw a grenade, and it caught one guy real bad. hurt him quite bad, and it got me just somewhere in the face. They took all that out, but and then a little bit in this area, so I wasn't wounded that bad. You know, they made me go back in just to check for infections later, you know, and stuff like that. But
now, was all of this stuff going on while it was still dark? The sniping and the grenades, this fight you're talking, was it all during the night still?
oh yeah,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you really can't even see much except whatever's blowing up. Now, you said you were cut off. How long do you think you were cut off?
probably I'd say an hour or so.
Okay.
And we knew it was just a matter of time. If we couldn't get help in there, we probably would have been all killed because they were moving. We could tell they were moving in on us. They were moving in, and all of a sudden we heard a radio call. We had an RTO down there, luckily, and he says, "Okay, everybody, get down on your face in the dirt." So why? You know, so we all got down, and here comes the gunships. And they come over, and oh man, they hit within feet of us. You know, just trying to keep them back, and then finally the Air Force came in with the fighters, and they started strafing through there and dropping bombs, and then they took off, chased them out, and it all pretty much ended then. You know,
Right.
Came down. And
Yeah. Now, that was a pretty big fight. Was that unusual? Did the North Vietnamese normally not stand and fight like that?
They knew they had us well numbered.
Yeah.
And we heard later that this was a kind of pretty elite group of NVA that had come down, and they had been going after them. It was a brigade-sized force that they were going after, and they figured they had 2 or 3 companies that were in that village. So we were way outnumbered.
Yeah.
And then if it wasn't for the fighters and the gunships, who knows what would have happened.
Right. Okay. So I was asking, was that unusual? Was it unusual to have that big a fight?
Yeah. It was unusual for that. That was my first one that I thought, hey, I might not make it out of here. You know, there's a good chance I won't. But
Okay. So before that, the firefights were usually smaller and shorter?
yeah, sometimes they'd last for just a few minutes. You know, they'd wrap off some rounds, and either our guys would get in there and kill the enemy, or they would take off running. You know, they had a good way of disappearing, and
They would fight when they chose to.
they'd be watching us when we wouldn't know they were watching us. You know, they were very clever. You know, very clever fighters.
Okay. Now, were there other big firefights after that one?
Yeah, we had one in April. That was pretty bad. It's kind of odd because it seemed like the 21st of the month was when you had our biggest firefights. And it was 21st of November. That's when we lost 38 guys killed. And then we had, I think it was 21st of March, and 21st of April, and 21st of May when another firefight. And then we went, surprisingly, for quite a while. We didn't really have a whole lot of them, you know.
All right. Now, over the course of that time that you spent out in the field, are there particular incidents or things that stand out in your memory?
Yeah, the 21st of March, the one I just told you about, that does. Every year on the 21st of March, I pretty well stick to myself, you know. But over the years, I've learned to just kind of shut things out, you know, if I can. But that one really stands out. So I lost, you know, some good friends there. And then in August, I lost another close friend. And then shortly after that, they pulled me out of the field and put me in the rear.
Okay. All right. And so when they pulled you out of the field, where did you wind up?
I ended up, first they brought me back to An Khe, and I just absolutely hated it there. It was still kind of a spit and polish type thing, you know, and saluting and all this kind of nonsense, you know. I mean, out in the field, nobody knows who's who, you know. The officers didn't wear rank, nobody did, you know, and didn't do any saluting or that stuff. And so then I asked the commander of that, of the 5th there, I can't stand it here, sir. And I said, can I go out to LZ? He said, yeah, if you want to, you can go out. So I went out to a forward LZ, and it was more, I worked in an aid station out there.
Yeah.
Until I went home.
Okay, so out on an LZ. Now, so it's an LZ now, so these were not permanent fire bases? They'd go out to an LZ for a while and set up and then move?
Some of them do. Some of them do. They're small.
Yeah.
Like LZ Uplift that we were at, that's a big place.
Okay.
You know. They had jeeps out there running around. It was a big.
Okay.
Big
So that really
base.
was a base camp, but just not the main base camp.
Yeah, right. And it was. They had lots of artillery and things like that there. You know, it was. And they'd have quite a few of the infantry units would come in there and guard it, you know, and so forth. And
now, when you're on these bases, or the LZs, did you get snipers or mortar fire or anything like that?
Yeah. Every once in a while they'd hit pretty hard, you know, and yeah, I can remember one particular time, LZ Uplift, they hit, where they did the cooks all worked, you know, for that, and they lost several cooks and support people like that
Right.
were killed.
Now, was that killed just by incoming fire?
Incoming
Mortars?
yeah.
That could happen.
And then we'd guard the perimeters too. Sometimes we go out and guard the perimeters, and then at night they would try to come in. But we had, you know, claymore mines all set out, and we're ready for them. We were more in bunkers than, you know,
Right.
instead of just a foxhole type thing. So
Okay. So they didn't get into the base while you were on
no,
it?
no, they tried. They try all the time, you know. But once the flares go off, we put the flares up, and then they'd take off, and we'd fire at them, chase them away. But
All right. Now, did you get an R&R while you were in Vietnam?
yeah,
Okay. Where'd you go?
Hawaii.
Okay.
I was supposed to go to Thailand, I think.
Okay.
I think it was Thailand I was supposed to go. I got down to Cam Bay where they did all the sending out there. Then I asked the sergeant that was in charge of, he looked at my orders where I'm going, and I told him what was going on, that I just got married before I came over, and was there a chance I could go to Hawaii? He says, yeah, come on back tomorrow morning, I'll have your orders for Hawaii. So I went to Hawaii and met my wife there.
Meet your wife there.
Yeah.
Okay. So what was it like to be away from the combat zone at that point?
Nervous. It was, of course, we lost a lot of weight, you know, that type of thing. And, you know, when I got to Hawaii, I was just nervous as could be, you know, just something's not right here, you know. I just came that far from saying maybe I was going to continue on back to the United States. You know? But of course I didn't. That's why they didn't like sending the guys to Hawaii unless they were going to meet their wives most of the time, because they thought guys would go there, they'd go AWOL and not show up again, you know. But.
Right. Do you think it was good for you to get out of there for a week?
Oh, it was.
Okay.
It certainly was, and my wife and I had a great time. And at that time, Hawaii was really receptive to the GIs that were coming there, you know. And almost every restaurant we go into didn't have to pay for nothing. They'd bring us drinks, they'd bring us food. Don't worry about it, you know, that type of thing. They treated us. It was just wonderful.
All right. Now, when did you go?
I went in, May, May of '67.
Okay.
I went.
All right. Now, when you were out in the field and you're with the combat units, what impression did you have of the officers who were commanding you, the captains and lieutenants?
We had some great ones. We had some not so great. We had some that had no business being out there. But we had some real good SEALs. I was really fortunate with that. One of them was a West Point graduate. He was terrific.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had one that we just loved. We just loved this guy. He was just like one of the guys,
Mm-hmm.
although you knew he was in charge. But he started having a lot of heart problems, and so they made him leave the field. And he literally cried when he had to leave the field, leave the guys. And
Now, was he a captain, a company commander, or was he a platoon leader?
he was a company commander.
Okay. All right. And what made someone a bad officer?
We had a few that would kind of hide out when the firefights were going on. They'd jump up and instead of moving the troops and then this, my platoon sergeant or something would have to take over, that
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. We had one of those, and he didn't last very long.
Yeah.
He got sent back to the rear.
Mm-hmm.
And,
All right.
but most of them overall were pretty good. I heard nightmare stories about some of them, but I didn't experience that. Maybe one or two that weren't that great.
All right. But you didn't have anybody who thought he knew everything, and sometimes you get the new lieutenants come in, they act like they know everything and want to boss everybody around. And then
No, we didn't have that.
Good.
In fact, we had a first sergeant. Our first sergeant, he was later killed after I went home in there, but he was a career man, probably the toughest man I've met before and ever since. He was just a soldier, that type of guy. And but he liked to play jokes on people. You never knew when to take him serious. And we had a new lieutenant, second lieutenant, come in, and he was going to take over our platoon. And I could tell this guy was nervous and scared. He comes walking up and he says, and we were in a base camp, Fort LZ at the time. And he comes walking up and he says, "Who's Doc Ventil?" I said, "That's me, sir. Can I help you with something?" Introduced him. He said, "The first sergeant told me to come and see you, and you would fill me in on everything that's going on." And Top was standing a little bit while, and he just cracked up because he knew this is Top, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just, and then he comes up, he starts laughing, he says, "You've been had, Lieutenant." He says, "You're in charge here, not Doc,"
Mm-hmm.
He's just a medic, so.
I don't know. Did that work? I mean, did the lieutenant get better after that?
Yeah, he did get better, yeah.
So you spent most of your time in Vietnam out in the field. So let's talk a little bit about just what life was like out in the field when there was not something big going on. If you're out there someplace, what do you do overnight when you're in the field?
Usually we'd dig in, and some areas we couldn't dig in. We did everything from sleeping in rice paddies with leaning up against the dike with water up here on you, and making some pretty good foxholes, that type of thing. It just depended on where we were.
Okay. And did you just, so what was a typical day like? So you get up in the morning wherever you are, then what do you do?
You'd either try to eat some sea rations, and if we're in a secure area where they could bring the choppers in, they'd bring in hot chow to us as much as they could. The first sergeant I was telling you, but top follower, he was great about that. He tried to get you know, hots into us as much as he possibly could. And then when they decided to move out, we move out, or the choppers would come in and pick us up, whatever was going on. You never knew from 1 minute to the next. You know, you just followed the leader, you know, so to speak.
Okay. And when you were say going through jungle or things like that, did you use trails or did you make your own trails?
Sometimes both. You know, some were trails that you could follow. Those are the most dangerous because they never know if they're going to be booby trapped, that type of thing. And I didn't like the canopy type stuff because you never knew they could have been hiding anywhere waiting for us, you know, type of thing. That was nerve-wracking for me to go through those. And the rice paddies had their own thing. You're out in the open, you just, no place to hide, you know, you're really kind of.
And then would you walk along the tops of the dikes or?
Yeah, usually around on the dikes. Or sometimes if they're dry and they didn't have a crop, you know, we'd walk right across the ground.
Okay. Now, would the dikes get booby-trapped?
They could be.
Okay.
Yep, we had the point men that were pretty sharp. We had a few that stepped on, we were killed, you know, that every once in a while. But they were pretty good at tracking that type of stuff. They knew what to look for.
And how many days in a row might you be out in the field?
Oh, gosh. Sometimes probably, I can remember times we were out there for 2 months.
Okay. So you're just going from one place to the next. And
Right. And they left us from one area and maybe chopper us 40, 50 miles away, or who knows what. And we'd go over on the Cambodian border, or we'd start working back and ended up on the South China Sea type of thing. So.
Okay, so you're just going all over the place.
Oh, all
So
over the Central Highlands,
yeah, they're really using the air mobile part of the
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. At that
You'll never
point.
get me on a chopper again. Never.
All right. Now, there are some stereotypes about Vietnam, and so
Yeah.
I asked them. One of them has to do with issues of racial tensions. I mean, did you have black soldiers in your unit, and how did they get along?
We had black soldiers, we had Puerto Ricans, we had a couple Asian guys even, you know, and stuff. When I was there, we got along just great. No nonsense.
Okay.
First sergeant wouldn't allow it, number one. And if guys had a problem, they worked it out, you know, just worked it out. Or the other guys helped work it out.
Right.
I think later in the war, after I went home, things got worse. I'm aware of that, but not in our unit. We never had those kind of problems at all.
And what about in a base camp, at a place like An Khe and that kind of thing? Did you notice any more of that?
No, not really.
And then, were there any issues with drug use at that time?
Oh yeah, drug use, marijuana. You know, I stayed away from that stuff because if you got caught, number one, if you got caught, cop didn't put up with it, you were in trouble.
Right.
And but some guys did, and then in fact, the sad thing is we had one medic that got heavy into it, the morphine and all that.
Oh.
And they kind of found out that where's all this morphine going, you know, he kind of disappeared one day, you know.
Yeah.
But it wasn't widespread as it was later, I think. I think it got much worse, but
Okay.
let's see.
All right.
Send me out some penicillin.
Okay. All right. So, and then when did you find out you were going home? How much advance notice did you have that you were going to leave?
It was in late August or early September, if I remember right. And then Top Fowler, we were in LZ Uplift. And then he said, Doc, he said, you've been out here a long time. You know, you've been with the company. And he says, I got some news for you. He says, I got your paperwork that you're going to go back to base camp, An Khe. He says, so you get your everything together. He says, there'll be a chopper coming in here later. He says, when it shows up, you get your butt on that chopper and you go home to your beautiful wife.
Mm-hmm.
You know? You go back to base camp. And then it's the weirdest thing, he did this to the guys that were going home a lot, but he would haul out a cigar, give you a cigar, then he'd shake your hand, you know. He says, you've been a good trooper, you know, that was it.
Yeah.
In fact, I felt so bad when I found out that he was killed in Tet, during the Tet, 68, and but he told me once, he said, Doc, it's the only way I want to die isn't fighting a war. That's all I've done my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
He was in World War II and when he was 17 years old. He was in
Okay.
World War II and then Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was on his fourth tour in Vietnam already.
Yeah.
And
All right. So he gives you your send-off. Okay. So how do you get back to the States when you leave? Where do you fly out of? You leave An Khe, and where do you go from there?
yeah, I went down to Cam Bay and left Cam Bay
Okay.
to go home.
All right.
And then I think we flew to Tokyo for refueling, it seems like. And maybe the Philippines. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
And then it was in the Philippines that I'd already written my wife a letter and said, hey, I'm going to be coming home, you know. And so then when I got to the Philippines and I got to you could use a telephone.
Okay.
There. And so I called and it was like at midnight, something like that, back in Michigan here. And then I called my wife and she was living with her parents while I was gone. So I said, I'm coming home. You know, I'll be home in a day or two. And then we landed in, we went to Washington, Washington first instead of Oakland. And then I flew home from there to Chicago. And
back. All right. So you're home on leave, but your enlistment is not up yet.
right.
Okay. So how long do you get before you have to report?
I took a month.
Okay.
I got a month leave.
All right. And then where do they send you to complete your enlistment? Or what's your next step?
I went to Fort Lewis, Washington. And there was a big Air Force base right next to I can't remember, McCord or one of those next door. I think it's all one big place there. And I kind of liked it out there. They had a huge military hospital there. And I met a lot of people, guys from the Air Force, veterans, and we had a lot of fun. My wife and I, it was a real military town all outside of.
Okay. And so were you able to live off base?
We decided to live on base.
Okay.
Some did. My buddy that came back with me from North Dakota, I was talking about, he decided to live off base, but sometimes he regretted it, sometimes he, but I liked it. It was convenient for me, you know. And
But they had housing for married couples?
oh yeah, very nice housing. We had ourselves a little puppy, we had a little dog, and it was good duty, it really was. I worked in the hospital for several months, and then they wanted me to team up with this because they knew I was a Vietnam combat medic, so they teamed me up with a company that would help train guys that were going to Vietnam, you know, how to take care of yourself out in the jungle and that type of thing, you know.
Okay. And how long did you do that?
But I must have done that for 3-4 months at least.
Okay.
And then they decided, they kind of did away with that. I got tired of it. Then they put me in the S3, they called it. It's kind of an office job.
Mm-hmm.
Where you check on people's records if it was time for them to have a training for rifle qualification or gun. I did that until I went home.
Well, let's see. Didn't you also go to Thailand?
Yeah.
Where does that fit in the sequence?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wait a minute. No, I didn't go home from.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about when I went home from Vietnam.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
Confused you a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, I was there until I think it was September of
Probably 68 now.
68.
Yeah.
And then I got ordered to go to Bangkok, Thailand.
Okay.
Or go to Thailand. And so I thought, this is kind of strange, you know. And so I got over to Thailand, and I was set to go to a special forces camp in North Thailand. And I was checking in. The sergeant was checking me and said, "You don't want to go there. You're a tour in Vietnam." And he says, "I would like to go to Bangkok." And so I did. They should come back to my house, so they sent me right to Bangkok, where I stayed.
Well, what kind of facility or base did we have in Bangkok?
They had a smaller military hospital there.
Okay.
But they had some serious, it was kind of a smaller hospital, but it was a full hospital emergency type thing. And they'd have guys that were wounded real bad, and sometimes they'd bring them into the hospital there.
Now, were these people who were serving in Thailand who were wounded, or were they bringing them in from other places?
They were bringing them in from Vietnam. Some
Okay.
of them, yeah. And some of them were in Thailand, but they were in combat zones,
Right.
type stuff. And so I worked there.
So how long did you do that?
I did that until I went home.
Okay, but how many months do you think?
And 3 months.
Yeah. It's kind of strange to me that
Yeah,
they
because
sent you
the
there.
funny thing is, when I got there, they told me, you know, this is an 18-month tour.
Yeah.
I said, I didn't volunteer to come over here. Somebody screwed up the paperwork, and they sent me over there. They says, well, you got to extend for that time. I said, there's no way I'm going to do it. And so they sent me to see this major. And the major says, somebody goofed up on your paperwork. He says, don't worry about it. You plan on going home, and
Okay.
you're going to be home.
Okay. So what was life like in Thailand while you were there?
Oh, it was wonderful. It was a beautiful place, you know. It's people are so friendly there, and
All right.
it was a crazy place too, you know.
Well, it was definitely a destination for a lot of the guys in Vietnam going on R&R.
Oh yeah,
To use facilities you were not going to use.
right. So I saw a lot of them over there when I was there all the time, and we'd be out, and I said, well, maybe you'll have to go to Vietnam. I said, well, I already did that, you know. You lucky dog, you know, that type of thing, you know. But
All right. So you get to the end of it. Now you get to go home. Now, what kind of out processing do they do when you get back to the States? When you come back from Thailand, do they just discharge you at the airport or base when you get in, or what happens?
yeah, they flew us into McCord Air Force Base, and then we processed out there. As soon as we got off the plane, I think we got off like at 11 o'clock at night, midnight. They brought us into the base, and they had this wonderful steak dinner for us. We had steak and all that kind of stuff, and they gave us our discharge papers, and then I had a chance to get air flights out of
Okay.
there.
Now, when you flew home, did you fly in uniform or did you change into civilian clothes?
I stayed in my uniform.
Okay. And did you have any trouble in the airports?
No,
Okay.
none whatsoever. I knew it was starting some of that stuff, but not as bad as what.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sometimes it happened and sometimes it didn't.
Right.
So again, that's kind of why I asked
Right.
that. Okay. So when do you finally get home?
I got home on the 23rd of December.
Okay. So just before Christmas. All right. And what do you do after you get back? Once you're out of the Army, now what do you do?
I first got out, I started college right away. I wanted to go, and it just wasn't working out. I was a nervous wreck yet,
Mhm.
you know, I was not, it was just hard adjusting when
Yeah.
I first came home. And so the first 5 years I just pretty much worked, and
What kind of work did you do?
I drove truck, and I worked at General Motors for a while, that type of thing.
Mhm.
I put in about 8 or 9 years in General Motors, and then when they offered the buyout, when GM was redoing everything, when the Toyota started giving everybody grief, you know, with selling their cars, and then they offered buyouts. So I took the buyout, and I had already finished my degree because I went back to college, you know.
Okay. So you were able to do that or adjust well enough to get through the college program?
Yeah.
All right. And where did you go to school?
I went to Davenport for 2 years. They had a special program at that time, and that was a 2-year school then. It wasn't a 4-year university like it is now. And we went on Fridays and Saturdays morning,
Mm-hmm.
all year round. So then I got my 2 years to get that done. So then I did well, and I thought I'll go to Grand Valley. So I went over to Grand Valley and got my bachelor's degree.
Yeah. Now, what was Grand Valley like when you were there?
Oh, much smaller than it is now. And you just had like just 2 or 3 buildings, you know, different halls where you go to your classes, and the classes were quite small at the time. And in fact, after I graduated, I didn't go back to for years and years, you know, to the college at all. And when I did go back, then my grandson was playing basketball, one of my grandsons, and he had some kind of training thing there at Grand Valley playing basketball. And first time I'd been back at campus, I didn't even recognize it. I had no clue where it was and how beautiful it is now. You know?
Oh, it's kind of taken off. All right. So you got a degree, and what did you get a degree in?
What's that?
What did you major in school?
In business.
In business, okay. And then did you go into a business job after that?
When I worked at GM, I was kind of in salary, and I worked hourly and I worked salary.
Okay.
But then when they took the buyout,
Right, they took the buyout.
I could buy out. Then I went to driving truck.
Okay.
Because that was something I always wanted to do. My dad drove truck years ago. He had his own truck, that type of thing. And so I went back in the driving truck for Spartan stores, and I retired from there.
All right. Now, you had mentioned when you first got back from Vietnam, you were kind of nervous, you were having trouble adjusting. Did you have, aside from just kind of being nervous, did you have any other kinds of sort of what we would now call PTSD symptoms? Did you have problems with loud noises or that kind of stuff?
A lot of nightmares. Yeah.
All right.
Even when I was during the day, I'd have like
You get flashbacks?
flashback type things.
Okay.
That lasted, I would say, for 5 years after I was out. And I was starting to drink too much. I was drinking a lot. And then I finally got out of that.
You just turned yourself around, or your wife made you do it? Or?
Yeah. And I got busier, too. I got busy coaching baseball and things like that. And to just try to work my way out of that now.
Okay.
I still have days that are not good.
Mhm.
But,
Yeah, it stays with you. All
and
right.
then-
Now, if you think back about your time in the service, what do you think you learned from it, or did you take anything positive out of it?
Yeah, I really did. Self-discipline and take responsibility for your own life,
Mhm.
that type of thing. Um, and I was fortunate that being a medic in a way, sometimes it was a blessing, sometimes a curse.
Mm-hmm.
It was a curse when you knew that you lost these guys. But in some ways it was a blessing that maybe you did something that kept them alive long enough that they made it back to the States. So that helps when I think of it in that respect, And I learn now to respect our military so much more.
Mm-hmm.
Like now, today, whenever I see anybody in uniform, I'm up there. I gotta go talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them how proud I am of them,
All right.
and other veterans. When I run to a Vietnam vet or any vet, it's welcome home type thing, And there's a real bond between Vietnam veterans. There's something there that bonds us together.
Yep. All right. Well, the whole thing makes for a pretty good story. So thank you very much for taking your time to share it.
I appreciate it. This has been an honor to be here, and I would just like to say to everybody that will listen to this or watch whatever, to treat our military well. Keep praying and hoping for them, and
Right. Okay.
and